Happy New Year and welcome to the January 2019 edition of the Plympton Podcast. I'm Andrew Hill. Coming up this month, we hear from South West Devon MP Sir Gary Streeter. We also speak with a local Marine who has become a part-time author. We learn about the mental health support group Males Aloud. And we hear about why Plymouth's administration of the general election in 2017 was so shambolic. Chris Hall is a local Marine from Plymouth. He's written a series of children's books centred around a character known as PC Snap. The first in the series has now been published, and we'll be hearing more about that later in this podcast. But firstly, he told Charlotte Willis about his time in the Marines.
So I am a Royal Marine. I've been in the Corps for 21 and a half years. I'm based down in Stonehouse at the moment. I was up at 4-2 Commando in Bickley a couple of years ago, but down in Stonehouse now. I've just got back from a couple of months away out in Oman, doing a big exercise out there, which was great fun. Bit hot, but good fun nonetheless. I live in Plymouth, got a wife and 3 children here that live in Plymstock. And as a sideline, I try and write some children's books every now and again.
Now, obviously, you just said you're a Royal Marine. What's the training like as a Royal Marine, if you don't mind me asking?
It's pretty hard. It's a while ago for me. I joined the Corps in 97, so but the memories are still pretty strong. But it's hard work. It tests you mentally, tests you physically. You build some really good friendships with the people that you're with. You find out a lot about yourself, sometimes good, sometimes not quite so good. But you've got to stick in there. You've got to get your head in the right place. And you've got to get your head down and crack on with it. So it was a great experience. I'm very glad I did it. And it's led to all sorts of fantastic opportunities and adventures in the 20 years since I finished it.
Now, I saw that you've done some tours, not just Oman, but you've done Afghanistan, Iraq and Northern Ireland, is that correct?
Yeah, I've done 3 tours of Iraq, 3 tours of Afghanistan, and I had 18 months in Northern Ireland as well, so a fair bit of time away from home. If
you don't mind me asking, what did that sort of involve, or are you not allowed to say?
Oh, no, I'm allowed to say that each tour is very different. So some, you can be in a big headquarters in a large base, and it can be quite comfortable, and you're sleeping on a proper bed, and sometimes you get air conditioning, and the food's pretty good. On other tours, you're in really austere conditions where you might be living in a bunker, or maybe a tent if you're lucky, or by the side of a vehicle, and you're eating rations, and you're out in the hot weather all the time. So it completely depends on which job you're doing and where you are. But they're always amazing experiences. Sometimes you have some pretty dark days, but you're always with a great bunch of guys, and the critical elements of the job is the people that you're working with, the fun that you can have. You help each other through the difficult times, and you make the most of the good fun times. So each tour has been very different, but I'm glad I've done each one of them in turn.
The administration of the 2017 general election in Plymouth was rather a shambles, with a catalogue of errors, including the misdeclaration of one of the results and multiple problems surrounding postal votes. Following the debacle, the council commissioned an expert, Dr. Smith, to report on the shortcomings and to provide recommendations for the future. He delivered his report during the course of a council meeting in 2018. He started by outlining the magnitude of the task he'd been commissioned to do.
It's been a sizable task. It's involved 24 interviews, well over 70 pieces of written evidence, and a major response from the public through the public call for evidence. Essentially, I was being asked to address 2 exam questions. One is, how did each individual error occur? And then secondly, why did so many errors occur in one election? So first of all, in dealing with each of the individual issues that occurred. The first one was that postal vote electors received 2 polling cards in the period immediately following the declaration of the election. 35,000 electors received 2 polling cards. This occurred essentially because a data store, an electronic data store, was created which had all eligible electors within it, both postal voters and polling station voters. That data store was sent to the printer to be printed and distributed to all those on the register at that moment in time. The printer that you contract with had expected, and it's part of the contract the printer has with your council, 2 data stores. One having the polling station voters on, and a second which has the postal voters in. Having received one data store, the printer asked for the second one, believing that what they had was the ones related to the polling stations. So a separate officer of the council to the one who sent the first store created a data store which only had the postal voters on and sent that, in effect duplicating the information which was subsequently printed and distributed. While in voting terms this is the least significant of the issues that occurred during the election period, in that, as you'll appreciate, polling cards don't have any statutory value and don't either detract from or give a ability to vote as a consequence of having the polling card. It clearly caused some confusion amongst the electorate who were in contact with the council. It was also clear, following an immediate review that the acting returning officer instituted, how this had occurred, and that essentially this was a matter of not having effective operational procedures, lack of checking in the system, and poor communication between two officers involved in the creation and distribution of that information to the printers. As a consequence of that review, and prior to the other things that occurred, the returning officer concluded that there needed to be a quality control checking procedure put in place to manage both the collection and use of data to the printers. And that's significant as an issue that comes up later.
And we'll be hearing more about Dr. Smith's findings throughout the course of this podcast. The sound of Big Ben was got working again to enable the new year to recently be seen in. Kevin Woodland spoke with Tim Redmond, who is one of the Big Ben clock guides.
We guide people up the tower to show them the clock and the bells, but we have 3 men here in Parliament who are employed by Parliament to maintain the clock mechanism, to the sort of mechanics, if you like, to make sure the clock and bells keep working.
Do they actually put a weight actually on the actual clock?
Basically, Kevin, there are 3 parts to the mechanism in the Elizabeth Tower. There is the clock, but then we've also, of course, got Big Ben, and we've got chime bells. And each of those 3 sections is powered by a weight.
Yeah.
Drops down the shaft. So with the clock, there is a quarter ton, well, that's about 250 kilos, cast iron weight that is released every 2 seconds. That weight drops down the shaft every 2 seconds, a bit like a grandfather clock or any other clock that works with pendulums and weight.
I see, actually, there's 334 steps to the belfry, is that right?
Yeah, that's right, yes. There's no lift, so anybody who wants to come along and visit us has to be able to climb those 334 steps. Although, Kevin, we don't do it all in one go. We do it in stages, so we'll do it in about 3 stages. So it's actually not really that onerous.
A lot of people actually think actually that Big Ben is actually the clock, but it's not, it's a bell, isn't it?
That's right. Big Ben is the big hour bell, the one that sounds on the hours. A lot of people think that Big Ben is the tower. In fact, we all call the whole tower Big Ben. And that's not a problem, it's not a problem if we continue to call the tower Big Ben, but strictly speaking, Big Ben actually is the bell, the hour bell.
How old actually is the clock itself? Is it Victorian?
Yes, it is. It was installed, the clock was basically installed in 1859. We had the 150th anniversary back in 2009. Now, it was a double anniversary, Kevin, actually, because it was an anniversary of Big Ben first sounding in 1859. It was also an anniversary of the clock. In fact, I think it was certainly May, and it may have been May the 31st, 1859, when the clock first started to tick. So, 2009, it was a double 150th anniversary, the clock and Big Ben.
I see the clock actually got Roman numerals around. It's very interesting back that time they had Roman numerals, but not have the English numbers. It's like the Roman time.
That's right. When you look at most clocks, probably 90% of clocks I would have thought around the world, never mind in this country, when you look at them, a lot of them will just have 1, 2, 3. But we do have Roman numerals on clock faces faces, the 4 clock faces here in the Elizabeth Tower. But the interesting thing about the Roman numerals, Kevin, with our clock faces here in Big Ben, is that 90% of clocks around the world that use Roman numerals for numbers, the hours, the number 4 usually is 4 ones, okay? Whereas actually, of course, the correct Roman numeral for 4 is a 1 and a V, isn't it?
Yep.
Actually, with our tower here at Big Ben, it is a 1 and a V. In fact, the clock face was designed by a man called Augustus Welby Pugin. That's P-U-G-I-N. He was the expert in Victorian times in Gothic architecture. He was responsible for a lot of the design work with the rebuilding of Parliament in the mid-1800s. And he designed the clock faces, and he was a real expert, and he liked to keep strictly to Gothic architecture, and therefore he made sure that the number 4 on our 4 clock faces here actually were the correct Roman numeral, 1 and a V.
I see you actually do guided walks actually around the tower and the clock and around Westminster as well, and Parliament. You do guided walks as well, don't you?
Yeah, that's right. Yes, we do tours of Big Ben, Mondays to Fridays. Now, to get on a tour, now the tours are only open, you've got to be a British resident. Now that doesn't mean to say that you've got to be a British citizen, because we take lots of people up there.
Yeah.
They have to live here in the UK permanently. They have to have an address, okay?
Yeah.
And also children have to be 11 and above. There's no upper age limit, because I've taken 3 91-year-old people up the tower before. Not at the same time, but at different times. A man and 2 women. And we take quite a few 80-year-olds up. Now, the way to book it is through your MP's office.
Yeah.
And you're not speaking to the MP, you're speaking to the MP staff in the office.
Yeah.
Probably in the constituency. And you can get the details of that either locally from the local library, or if you haven't got a computer, you can probably get it from the telephone book or going into the local library. But if you've got a computer, you can go online to the parliamentary website, which is www.parliament.uk, and you can go on there, you can find the details, contact details for your local MP. But yes, you book a tour through your MP's office, and you just tell them when you'd like to go, and then they will contact us and try and get that date for you.
Back now to Dr. Smith's report into the conduct of the 2017 general election process in Plymouth, as he outlines another major error which occurred.
The second specific error occurred over the fact that 331 people who had received a polling card were subsequently removed from the register before the election. Like any council, you have a rolling responsibility to ensure that the register is accurate and up to date. And as part of that process, the returning officers required to query with any elector where the information held on their registration differs from information that's come to light about them. The most common forms that this occurs is with people who change their names. At the time that the election was called, you had 331 people going through that process where there was some anomaly between the information held on the register about those people and other information that had come to light. And those 331 people had been receiving formal notifications from the returning officer advising them that there was an anomaly and asking for information and evidence in order that those anomalies could be resolved and their registration maintained. There are 3 notifications that are required to be given over time. Each one escalates the issue. So by the time the 3rd notification had been issued, those 331 had not responded, had not provided the information, and were being advised that if that information did not come forward, then their names would be removed from the register. That process had been going on for a number of months prior to the election being called. Now, the officer responsible within the Registration Election Service for this process concluded in the middle of the election process to complete that review, and in completing that review, removed those 331 people from the register. The officer involved did not recognise the controversy and difficulty that placed the council in as a consequence of those same 331 people had already had their polling cards. And the officer did not escalate the matter to either the Deputy Returning Officer, the Returning Officer, or indeed sought advice from the Electoral Commission. Whilst obviously I can't speak for what the Electoral Commission may have concluded, if my advice had been sought, my view would have not to complete the review. So that review had been going on for some time. There was no reason why the review had to be concluded at that moment in time. And the completion of the review could have been held over till after the election, allowing the people who were still on the register to vote. That error in judgment, unfortunately, was subsequently compounded by the fact that 38 of those people attended a polling station to find that they were no longer on the register. And when they complained to the presiding officer spoke to the central team. And obviously the details of the person were checked and found to be one of those people that had been removed. And those 38 people were put back on the register. This is not lawful practice. It was done under the grounds of a clerical error, and it does not meet the criteria to put people back on. Unfortunately, once they had been removed, they could not be put back on the register without going through the whole registration process again. Again, those matters were dealt with entirely operationally, and no advice was sought from senior officers, the returning officer or the deputy returning officer. That issue, in my view, was a poor judgment by the officers involved.
South West Devon MP Gary Streeter has been knighted in the recent New Year's Honours list. Towards the end of last year, he appeared on Charlotte Willis's hospital radio programme. He outlined to Charlotte how he came to enter a career in law prior to taking up an interest in politics.
I'm not quite sure now, looking back on it, why I chose law. I did English, history and French at A-level, and I don't know why I chose law, to be honest with you. I just sort of seemed to fill in my application papers for university and put law in it. But looking back on it, it was a great choice for me. It really suited me as a discipline. I did pretty well at it, so that was the right choice for me.
And you went on to work for Furt & Anstey, which was originally Furt & Bowden, and that's the solicitors. Tell us a little bit about that, and what did you specialise in?
Well, first of all, I trained in a large firm it was then called Coward Chance, now called Clifford Chance. It's actually the largest firm in the world now. That was in the City of London when I finished at King's, and qualified as a solicitor there. But I got married during my 2 years training, and my wife is from Barnstable. I was from Mid-Devon. And we decided once we got married, once I qualified, we'd come to the West Country where I would practice as a lawyer. And I joined a firm called Furt & Bowden on North Hill in Plymouth, which many people will remember. And it's now called Furt & Anstey, and I became a partner there in 1984, specialising in company law. So I spent most of my time as a lawyer advising businesses. And even today, as a constituency member of Parliament, I love visiting businesses, seeing what they're getting up to, what they're making, how they're getting on. And if I can offer any advice, then I am free with my advice, as my wife says, sometimes far too free with it.
So you were a councillor for the SDP from 1986 to 1992. Do you think there will be a breakaway from the Labour Party today with the way that things are?
Well, let me just explain that when I first made a decision to get involved in politics at the age of 30, rather unusually, I knew nothing about politics. I got involved in politics as a committed Christian to try and getting my hands on stuff like public service, to try and serve in a wider capacity. But I joined up not knowing anything about it. So I joined the SDP before I really started thinking about politics and who I was and what I believed, mainly because David Owen was a big MP here, the leader of the SDP in those days. So that's why I joined it. And then after about 18 months of being on the council as an SDP councillor and thinking about, well, what do I actually believe? I then joined the Conservative Party because I worked out I'm a natural Tory. That's just who I am. And that's just one of those things. Now, I know that at the moment there are quite a few, if you like, mainstream Labour MPs at Westminster who are extremely dismayed, really, at their current leadership. And they are talking regularly about setting up something new. It's been in the media a few times. And the latest intelligence I have, because, just behind the scenes, we're actually very good friends at Westminster, most of us. So some of my best friends up there are Labour MPs. I think the latest intelligence is that in the new year, there is likely to be some kind of breakaway movement.
Back to local author Chris Hornow and his book PC Snap and the Case of the Escaped Lion. One of the central characters in the book, and who is depicted on the front cover, is a dog, as Charlotte explored with Chris.
The first thing I'm drawn to is the little dog on the front. Dog. I love it.
Everybody is.
Yeah, I love that. It's really cute. And obviously, I've just sort of explained to the listeners, it looks quite painted and it's really colourful.
Yeah.
Particularly children would be drawn right away to the little dog, I would have thought, and the top of the lion's head.
Well, everybody's drawn to the dog. It's quite a good story behind the dog. So we go camping with some friends every summer down in Gwithian in Cornwall, and some friends of ours they've got a dog called Louis, and my kids love him, particularly my son, my youngest son. He loves Louis, and we always knew that PC Snap would have a dog as a sidekick, and then we chose the name Louis. And Louis's not a black Labrador, the real live Louis, but black Labrador is our favourite breed if we ever get a dog. So we thought we'd merge the real world with the fantasy and create Louis. But more people talk about Louis from this book than probably any other character, which is quite nice. This is the first of 8 books that I've got. A couple of others are nearly ready to go. We're going to see how this one sells, see whether we can secure another publishing deal, and then if we can, then we'll hopefully publish them all the way through to the final one. The final one's actually a prequel. It talks you through the story of before PC Snap and the Escaped Lion, of when PC Snap and Louis first met. It's a pretty dramatic story. It's a daring rescue. I think it's the best of the 8 books, and hopefully we'll have the people sell enough books, and then we'll have the money that we need to then publish all 8 of them, and people can find out how the 2 of them met.
I'm already looking forward to that. I have to be honest, I read the book and I was really impressed with it.
Thank you very much.
I know it's aimed at children, but I think actually even adults got something out of that, really. So where did PC Snap really come from, though?
So PC Snap is a bit of a family heirloom. So my dad vaguely remembers his aunt telling him stories about a character called PC Snap. He was a character that his aunt used to base a story on. She'd tie in my dad and other people who were around at the time, and things that had happened either on that day or things that were coming up. Sometimes good or bad, some things that the kids were looking forward to or not. And she would weave all those together into a story. And my dad took that same technique forward with me and my brothers and sisters. And then he's done it with all the grandkids as well, and obviously including my kids. The kids love the stories, and my wife and I thought, wouldn't it be great to get some of the story, either record them or get them written up. And in the end, we decided, when my dad was away, that the kids would ask me to make up the stories when he wasn't there, and so I made a few stories up, and eventually Kim, my wife, said to me, why don't we get some of these typed up? And a couple of years ago, I was working in London, and I was commuting up and down on the train, and I thought, if I don't type them now, I'm never going to have the time to do them. So I spent many hours heading from Paddington down to Plymouth and back up the way on my laptop, typing the stories up. So I used the same principles as my dad did. PC Snap's the basis. He's not always the hero. In fact, often he's not the hero. It's about all the different characters working together, overcoming the situation that they find themselves in, having a bit of a laugh, learning about themselves. And then all the characters in the book are based on people that we know, either family or friends or people that I've worked with. So in this book, the 3 lions that come into the story, they're called Sandra, Margaret and Paul. And I thought how fitting it would be to call them after my in-laws. So Paul is my father-in-law, and my mother-in-law is called Sandra Margaret. So I'm not sure how chuffed they are to be given that accolade, but I think it's quite funny. And all the characters are real life, so my 3 kids star in there, and then in the other books, friends of theirs do as well.
Returning to the litany of errors which occurred with the administration of the 2017 general election in Plymouth, Dr. Smith went on to outline the third and probably most significant error which occurred.
The third and most serious in terms of its scale and impact on voters was the fact that 1,926 people who were eligible for a postal vote did not receive their postal vote pack in the normal manner. This takes me back to the the explanation I gave you about the 2 polling cards, in that essentially the same error occurred in this case as it did with the 2 polling cards. In that, between the 11th of May and the 23rd of May, a data file store was created of all those who were eligible registered postal voters. And that store was created with the intention of sending that to the printers on the 24th of May, following the close of registration for postal voting. On the end of that day, the 23rd of May, after 5 o'clock, a different officer within the core team swept the electronic system to find all those who were eligible postal voters and created a separate data store. That person believed that they were sweeping everybody since the 11th of May, but in fact what they were doing was sweeping up everybody that had come in during that day since the first data store had been created. So that second data store, which had approximately 1,300 people on, did go to the printers, was printed and distributed. But the file with 1,926 people did not, and sat on the system, undetected. During the week before the election, the elections team received a trickle of phone calls from postal voters saying they hadn't received their postal vote packs. This is not abnormal. There's usually people who haven't received it for one reason or another. Sometimes because they're not actually registered for a postal vote, other times because it's got lost in the mail and so on. So that's an entirely predictable process and happens everywhere. However, on the Friday prior to the election, that trickle turned into a cascade. And during that Friday, the number of calls that the core team were receiving about postal vote packs which had not been received amassed. So by the end of that Friday, it was clear to the team that they had a serious problem. They didn't know the nature of the problem, they didn't understand yet the scale of it, but they knew it was out of the ordinary. That was then escalated to the acting returning officer during Friday evening. And the acting returning officer asked for an investigation to be immediately undertaken to discover the source of the problem. And at the same time, the core team began issuing replacement postal votes to as many people as possible who were ringing in on that Friday and over the weekend and on Monday. During that period, it became clear that whilst the council assumed to begin with that it was a problem with Royal Mail, as the weekend progressed and on Monday it became clear that other reasons for it must be sought than just looking at Royal Mail. And under the instructions of the returning officer, further more detailed investigations were undertaken and technical experts were brought in to start to interrogate the software systems. By Tuesday lunchtime, the source of the problem and the scale of the problem was understood. In other words, the data file was found. By that time, of course, a number of the 1,926 people had received replacement packs, but it left just over 1,100 people who still hadn't had their replacement packs.
Mental well-being is a more talked-about subject these days than it once was. Just a few weeks ago, a distressed man had to be talked down from the flyover above Marsh Mills roundabout. Paul Thompson found himself in a similar position on the Tamar Bridge earlier in his life, and he has gone on to found the mental health support group Males Aloud. He told me more about it.
Yeah, so Males Aloud is a signpost page for men in Plymouth to reach out to us, gain information, advice, but also to attend events in the community that we host. We've got events coming up in the city at the moment. We've just done one for Borough Tour actually called Walk the Talk, where we had 9 blokes come along who haven't met each other before and went around, had a chat and stimulated the mind. We've got a quiz night on Saturday, this Saturday the 13th at the Chadderwood Social Club, and all the donations will be for Males Aloud. So that's another event we've got on. We have a hub on the 26th of October, which is our first one at Derriford Science Park, which is the counselling hub. We've got a meet and greet session for the first time, so blokes can come along, have a chat with us, have a coffee, and basically just get to know everybody really. And that will be the first of many events that we'll be having at the hub. So basically, yeah, that's what we're all about. We do a one-to-one service as well via an email, WhatsApp group, or even just to meet in the community have a chat in a Costa. Or
so what's the typical sort of demographic of person you're aiming at attracting?
Yeah, so we're trying to target men who live obviously suffering in silence, that maybe haven't got a support network or having a relationship problem or feel that they've got nowhere to run or hide, they've got nowhere to gain advice. A lot of men that we are speaking to are reaching out to us, don't feel they have an option, that they're going to their GP and they're getting the medication and thinking that's the magic wand, that the medication will be the symptom and it'll be the formula. But in hindsight, it isn't the cure. I mean, I've been through experiences myself in mental health, been in a really dark place, actually trying to take my life at the age of 32. And for me, I actually found that understanding myself, accepting what I had, and talking was my medicine. And what we're trying to encourage and advise men of all different backgrounds and ages is that let's work with this. Let's use me and use Mo and Dan, who run the group, with our own personal experiences to really just find that self-heal and self-help about how you can sort of open up.
Yeah, I mean, men are notorious for bottling things up, aren't they? I mean, what would you say to someone who's sort of that mindset? Yeah,
so if you know anybody out there that's maybe suffering, or yourself that are listening to this, try and reach out, try and speak to a family member, try and reach out to your partner, or even to Males Aloud page, or there's the Samaritans, which are a 24-hour service. Try and take that initial step and just reach out. It doesn't have to be about your life problems. It can just be a baby step approach about, I've had a bad day actually. I'm actually not understanding why I'm up and down, or just and it's not something that's going to happen overnight. But if you can take that initial step and just open up initially, then everything will hopefully follow.
I mean, what are you looking at long term for your organisation?
Yeah, so we're trying to make ourselves a charity. We're just in the process of applying for funding. The page has only been going eight weeks, and within that 8 weeks, we've had 51 men come forward with all different experiences and concerns and advice needed. We've got over 700 followers on Facebook now, and I didn't realise when I set up the page that it will be this big in the need that is required in the community. Mm-hmm. So the aim now is to get funding, to make ourselves a charity, so we can not just fund activities and stuff, but buy equipment for maybe sport events, beer mats for pubs, flyers, and marquees when we do festivals and community work, just to give us more of an approach and sort of option, really.
So after sort of one-to-one meeting that you have with people, are you looking to set up, as you said, there's some degree of events yourself, but what about signposting them to other organisations as well? Yeah,
because we are predominantly a signpost page, we're gaining advice and experience ourselves and knowledge about what other services are in Plymouth and the UK. And it's a learning curve for us, but we've had people come along to us and say, look, I've got an issue with a certain criteria, and it's like, well, we don't know the answer to that, but we can signpost you to somewhere that could help you. And there are Plymouth options, there is CAMS, depending on the age and the background and so forth, but it's not a quick fix with Plymouth options. There is a waiting list. It's about an 8-month waiting list to see Plymouth options counselling, but if we can have that loophole with us, we're working alongside Plymouth Chill, who also are a charity in Plymouth that do workshops and so forth. We're linked in with an arts group as well at Stoke Business Park, so guys can come along to other groups, not just us. So blokes have got an option basically of where to go.
Mm-hmm. You've indicated the sort of extended demand you've had in the short number of weeks you've been going. So are you looking for people to actually be helping you out to get this project bigger?
Yeah, it was just me that started this project, this awareness page, but now we've got 3, myself, Mo and Dan, that run the group as volunteers, and we have got a couple of other people that want to help and be a support network and actually help people one-to-one or via the WhatsApp or an email. So we're not there all the time, we're not there 24/7, we've all got commitments and work, families and so forth, but when people do message us in the first instance, we have a automated reply so that we will reach out to you when we can, because we're not forgetting about people. We're not going to give that impression we're forgetting about people. People know themselves, more importantly, that we've identified that you've come forward. So I think the aim is to, obviously because we're expanding, the aim is to get more people on board with us and sort of engage with the people that need help, really.
Brexit has been a debating issue in local homes and pubs for many a long while now, since the 2016 referendum. Gary Streeter was in favour of remaining in Europe. He explained to Charlotte Willis why he held this view.
Well, I felt very strongly that the long-term gains were not very well explained and difficult to recognise, but the short-term pain was very evident. I couldn't really see that our country was going to benefit in the long term from being outside the EU. I also think the EU is an important institution in putting in place an overarching political structure over Europe. We've looked back at, if you look back at the last few centuries, when Europe hasn't got a coherent overall structure, when it's a number of nation states all jostling together, that doesn't end well. You know, that's led us to 2 world wars. In the 19th century, all kinds of wars on the mainland. I felt the EU was far from perfect, but that it was the right thing to do to stay in it. And I still think that. But the people of this country have spoken. They voted in June 2016 to leave. So now I feel very strongly, very deeply as a Democrat, we have to deliver on what they voted for. We said we would honour it, and so we must.
What does Brexit mean for Plymouth?
We don't really know what it means for any of us yet, to be honest. I'm afraid that there are a number of companies in in Plymouth, which are nervous about what you might call a no-deal Brexit. But I'm hopeful we will get a deal, which will mean that there won't be sort of a major disruption to our businesses. I mean, the big problem with Brexit is if we are now exporting or importing without any tariffs, without any sort of restrictions at the borders, and then you suddenly introduce tariffs or border controls and customs checks, then that's going to disrupt business, and we don't want that. So I'm hoping we're going to get a deal and that the businesses of Plymouth can sleep easy in their beds tonight, that Parliament will support it, and that we will just move towards a proper full Brexit over the next 2 or 3 years without crashing our economy.
Why do you think Plymouth voted with such a majority, though, to leave the EU?
Well, that is a good question. I mean, I think many of us feel that the Brexit vote wasn't just about Brexit. It was a demonstration that people felt disgruntled about what the political classes had delivered. There were a lot of people who felt left behind. In a city like Plymouth, perhaps more so than in some other places. So the rural part of my constituency, the South Hounds, voted to remain. But Plympton and Plymstock in my constituency voted heavily to come out. And the whole of Plymouth voted heavily to come out, 60-40, I think. So I think it reflected a view about being left behind, a view about immigration, certainly, and perhaps a view that we were fed up with being bossed around by the EU, which I completely understand. But in the long term, we've got to do what's best in the national interest. And I think now getting a Brexit deal whereby we can come out in an orderly fashion without crashing our economy is in everyone's best interest.
Do you think 16-year-olds should have been given the right to vote, seeing it's regarding their future on Brexit?
I don't. I don't think they should have had the right to vote in the referendum. Parliament did debate that issue. Nor do I think they should have the right to vote at general elections. If more 18-year-olds start using their right to vote, because basically until the referendum, where maybe 30% of 18-year-olds voted, only 30%. Previous to that, about 20% of 18-year-olds were exercising their right to vote. And I often say to younger audiences, if you want me to change my mind on the age of voting, more 18 to 24-year-olds need to exercise their vote, because at the moment it's pretty pathetic percentages.
Post-Brexit, how will it affect local farmers, and what will happen with the EU subsidies?
How will it affect them? I don't think it's going to go very well, if I'm honest. The subsidy regime is clearly going to be phased out over the next 7 years. We've said that in the agricultural bill that's being produced. I think that efficient, modern farmers using modern technology are going to get the best of the new British agricultural system. There will be some support for people who do what I call public goods, so opening up their farms to access for walkers and things, or looking after the countryside. But for your small, let's say 150, 200 acre dairy farm in Devon, I think that if we're not careful, they could be squeezed in the middle. I did say this at the time of the referendum, saying if you vote for Brexit, the deal that we can put in place might not be as advantageous as the current deal, But that didn't seem to... Basically, most of them voted for Brexit, and now we'll do the best deal possible, but I think they are going to get squeezed.
More now on Dr. Smith's election report.
The returning officer made a very bold decision in instituting using the civil emergency procedures of the council to address the problem of the voting packs. This enabled the full resources of the council to be marshalled, a bit like a military operation, in order to create, distribute postal packs to the eligible voters that were missing. It was a simply mammoth task to take on. It was mammoth both because of the number of people who required a postal vote within 48 hours, made more serious by the fact that the council did not have the printing technical processes to create packs. You will know how complicated a postal pack is. And all those elements of a postal pack are prescribed in law. And unless you've got a specialist printing machinery, you simply can't just create those packs off a normal printing machine. And that meant that the council had to print the elements of the postal pack, each separately, manually collate them into a single pack, check them, number them, check them against eligible voters awaiting a postal pack, and then, of course, distribute them. A huge task to be undertaken. Right from the outset, the single goal of this process was to distribute as many of the packs to eligible voters as possible. From the outset, it was recognised that 87 of your electors were not going to get to their packs. Majority of them because they lived abroad, and there was no feasible way of getting the packs there and back in the remaining time. But the remainder of people, it was the intention to do so. But as you can imagine, in taking that decision and actioning that, it put further risks into the system around your ability to do that, given as well as doing this operation, you're still preparing for the election itself, which was, as I say, less than 48 hours to go. So this team was mobilised by the Tuesday evening and went into action. Unfortunately, it came to light during the investigation that I did that in the creation of these postal packs, a further error occurred in 374 packs, in that those packs did not have the required signature box in them. So the instructions to the elector to verify themselves by giving their date of birth and their signature was correct. But the actual box within which the signature is intended to go was missing in 374 packs. 124 of those packs were in fact returned to the council as completed votes, but 39 of them were rejected at verification stage for want of a signature. So in other words, 39 that didn't have the signature box, although there was a space, didn't have a signature in and were rejected. It is frankly remarkable, notwithstanding the errors, and of course notwithstanding the fact that you shouldn't have found yourself in this position, it is remarkable that so many voters in such a short space of time received their postal votes. And I don't consider that more could have been done to try and remedy the situation. The returning officer has a legal duty that where errors occur in the administration of an election, then the returning officer must do everything within her power and within the law to remedy that situation. And my view is that your returning officer did exactly that in the context of the error that occurred.
At the time Dr. Smith presented his report to the council, the 2018 local elections had not yet taken place and the Conservatives were still in charge. Labour's Johnny Morris gave his reaction to the report Dr. Smith had presented.
It is no secret that since they took control last year, the ruling Tory group has overseen an administration of shambolic incompetence. From the chaotic implementation of fortnightly bin collections to the mismanagement of strategic roadworks, from trying to make cuts to council tax support that went against the council's own child poverty policies to leaving hedges uncut and road gullies unweeded, the people of Plymouth daily see a sad litany of woes that speak of an administration that doesn't know how to govern. And although those problems that affect people daily affect them on the most basic level, this failure, this fiasco, hits at the most fundamental level because it is a failure of democracy itself. And democracy is precious and it is fragile. It relies on faith and trust in its administration, that anyone who may vote can vote, that every vote will be counted, that every result announced is the true and accurate one. When that fails, the very legitimacy of a council, a parliament, a government is called into question. This long list of failures in our electoral services needs to be accounted for. The leader of the council, the cabinet member in charge of elections, Councillor Nicholson, the cabinet member in charge of governance and democracy, Councillor Riley. It is at their feet that this fiasco squarely lies. I hope Councillor Nicholson will speak in the debate. I hope when he does, he apologises. He has overseen, as the publicly accountable councillor, a failure of democracy, and he should apologise to the people of Plymouth Moorview, Sutton and Devonport and South West Devon. Further to that, a key recommendation before us is that it is the Constitutional Review Group that monitors the improvement plan and holds the acting returning officer to account. I want an assurance today. I don't put it through as an amendment. I rely on the councillor's honour. I want an assurance today that Councillor Nicholson, Councillor Riley and Councillor Bowyer resign from that Constitutional Review Group. It is not right that their actions as politicians should be reviewed by a group of which they are the three Conservative members. It may be, given the slim pickings available, that there aren't three other Conservative members who are more competent, but there are for sure 27 who are less complicit. Only in this way, by being publicly accountable, by not reviewing their own failures, can the people of Plymouth begin to have their faith in democracy itself restored, the legitimacy of this council restored, and the people of Plymouth, the disenfranchised electors of Plymouth, can feel that somebody has answered for their mistakes.
Plympton St Mary Ward Councillor Patrick Nicholson was the relevant portfolio holder at the time, as well as being deputy leader of the council. He was quick to respond to Councillor Morris's comments.
Well, thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm very happy, firstly, to make my own contribution, but to respond to Councillor Morris, because whilst I fully agree with Councillor Evans and the leader's contribution, I'm disappointed that Councillor Morris is being the fall guy in terms of making this the debate that he's turning it to become. Because, Lord Mayor, we've just had from Dr Smith, we've had from the Chief Executive as the Acting Returning Officer, an explanation also of the division of responsibility for running elections, which Councillor Morris clearly is not willing to accept, that the day-to-day management of the election, whilst I am the Cabinet Member and take full responsibility for providing the resources and the function, ultimately the day-to-day running of the election hasn't been something that I've taken responsibility for. But I would place on record, my Lord Mayor, along with the leader and others who have spoken, my disappointment and sorrow and apology to the citizens that should have had an opportunity to vote, and those that did vote, but albeit didn't have the smooth electoral process that we normally have in Plymouth at the general election. That is unacceptable. You know, the fundamental element of a council is the democratic process. And I, for one, having been involved, like many in this chamber for many, many years, we've taken for granted, unfortunately, the very good processes that the City Council has had, certainly over the last 35 years. And to have faced an election with so many errors in the process isn't something I personally feel proud of, and I'm sure all members of this chamber feel the same. But accountability, Councillor Morris, I'm always happy to accept. But the instances that you've cited, both for the electoral process, but also the major traffic schemes in the city, the schemes that you as an administration have sought to tender and to promote, are ones that I'm trying to grapple with on a day-to-day basis, faced with many unforeseen, just like the elections process in many ways, unforeseen circumstances of public utility works, not necessarily in the manner that the plans for many of our highway networks actually set out. So I think we've all got lessons to learn, but the Constitutional Review Group is an appropriate forum for that to take place. I'm very happy in that process, as I'm sure the Leader and Councillor Riley equally, to if we are responsible for matters that had a bearing on the election, which I don't believe they necessarily have, we set a budget, and the budget that we inherited from the Labour group on taking power didn't change in any respect as far as election services are concerned. There are aspects, and I'll say them in public. There are reports that are referred to in 2015 that I've never seen a copy of. I would expect the Constitutional Review Group to have full and open access to all documentation that existed behind the scenes that the Chief Executive and others in the organisation have sought benefit from. I'd expect all members of the Constitutional Review panel equally, and the Leader of the Opposition, as he's not a member of the CRG panel, equally to have access. This is a full and frank and open discussion. We want, I hope, as a whole authority, to put this right. Whilst we're always going to get sniping from the likes of Councillor Morris, he's not the best serving member of this authority to abide by respect and courtesy and the processes of and the appropriate processes of public democracy. But having said that, he's still for the next few months an elected representative of the Southway ward, and therefore I respect that position that he holds. We will do our best to rectify these matters. I will, with others, do my very best to restore public confidence not only in the election service but also in Plymouth City Council, because Councillor Evans is absolutely right. This has denigrated the work of the City Council. That is unacceptable. We want Plymouth to be held in the highest esteem, and we want our public services delivered in an appropriate way. And that's what we should all strive to achieve, not only on this, but in all that we do.
Over in the Plympton Earl ward, Councillor Terry Beer still had a point she was concerned about, and she put a question to Dr Smith.
Thank you very much for your complex report. I appreciate the work you put into it for us. Can you just reassure myself, my colleagues here in the council and members of the public that in the instant, like on the occasion for myself, I got a polling card through the post when actually I'd already registered for a postal vote, that I couldn't have voted twice?
No, you can't. The register itself was accurate and complete, notwithstanding the issue about the 331. And it clearly, within the register, requires, it's clear in the register who has is registered for a postal vote and who is registered to vote at the polling station. So it's only the register that matters at the end of the day. And in that context, the register was accurate.
Returning for the penultimate time in his podcast to local author Chris Hall, Charlotte asked him about the book's local connections in its storyline.
Now, when I read it, I assumed it was set in Down Thomas, and then realised to my cost that it was set in in the South Hams as well. It wasn't just Down Thomas. Is the local connection been a positive thing for this book, do you think?
I think so. The aim, again, making the story relevant to the kids. There's so we've got the mythical town of Haybrook Thomas and merging Haybrook Bay with Down Thomas. Lots of the local areas around us, so people might recognise Reservoir Road from Plymstock and Who Hill from near Stan Heights where we used to live. So I try and tie in as many local features in to make the stories as real as possible, and I think it grounds them for the kids, and they in their own minds they can see where the story's unfolding, but it's not setting the conditions and the environment completely, so their imaginations can run from that start point, which I think works for them as well.
Well, the story's called PC Snap and the Case of the Escaped Lion. Can you tell us where it's available from, first of all, anyone that's listening who wants to purchase one, who likes the sound of this? And obviously we'll hear some of it later on as well during the programme. And obviously, is it available online? Can people directly get them off you?
People can get them off me. That's not a problem. If they come through the station, you can pass my contact details on.
Certainly.
The easiest way to get it is it's available on Amazon. You can buy a paperback copy or you can get a Kindle version. The cheapest way to get your hands on the book is to go to the publisher's website. So the publisher's is Austin Macaulay, AUSTIN MACAULEY. If you go onto their website, type in my name or PC Snap and the Case of the Escaped Lion, then it'll take you directly to the link in their own website, and you can buy a copy from there. So that's the cheapest way to get it, but you can get it off Amazon, both paperback and Kindle.
And we'll be hearing a short extract from PC Snap and the Case of the Escaped Lion in a few moments. Meanwhile, another of the things which happened in 2018 is that the Boundary Commission for England bowed to local public opinion and decided to include the name of Plympton in the intended name for the area's new constituency to replace the current South West Devon one. Gary Streeter explained why it was important for Plympton to be included in the new name.
That was important because actually in the new seat, Plympton will be the biggest community in it. Plympton has 35,000 people living in it. It's pretty big. And to have a seat, therefore, which sort of mentioned Tavistock, mentioned Ivybridge, which are both significantly smaller communities, it just seemed ridiculous and wrong. So I suggested either it should still be called South West Devon, because it would still be an accurate description, South, West, Devon, would still describe the territory quite well, but actually even better, if we're going to have Tavistock and Ivybridge, let's have Plympton, and now it's going to be called Plympton, Tavistock and Ivybridge.
Yes, because your current constituencies covers the local three local areas, Plymouth, Southampton and Devon, which you've just said. Presumably the new one will also include some interaction with West Devon Borough Council.
Yes.
But to what extent is the problem that you may have some different local authorities within one constituency?
I already have to grapple with 3 different local authorities, Plymouth Council, Devon Council and South Hams District Council. For the 5 years that I mentioned, which I couldn't quite remember when it is, I also had a chunk of West Devon as well. So I used to go to Tavistock to see the West Devon councillors. So it's nothing new for me to juggle different local authorities. And I do look forward to working with West Devon Borough Council. Of course, they work closely with South Hams, I ought to say. They have joint officers. They've made one or two interesting decisions recently, and I look forward to discussing those with them. But it's a lovely part of the world, and I look forward to working together with them.
All this is taking place, of course, obviously, presumably by the next general election.
It only comes into being at the next general election, but only if Parliament approves that measure.
So we've been hearing in this podcast about the book PC Snap and the Case of the Escaped Lion. Let's get a better flavour of it as we listen to author Chris Hall narrating a short extract from it.
Slumped in his bed in the corner of the living room by the log burner, with his chin on his paws and with his lips hanging slightly unevenly in a way that made him look like he was smiling, Louis owned PC Snap's heart. PC Snap got up from his chair in the same manner that he had for many years. He ran his calloused hand over Louis's smooth head and uttered Louis's favourite words. "Come on then, boy." The speed with which Louis went from lying down and completely relaxed to four-legged rocket always amazed PC Snap. Once those words had been uttered each morning, Louis was like a bullet from a gun. He seemed to rise up, turn around 180 degrees in mid-air, and be halfway to the door before PC Snap had finished the sentence. PC Snap had seen a lot of people try and run fast from a standing start, mainly criminals, but none of them had a patch on Louis. However, as happened most mornings, halfway to the front door, Louis realised the need to stop and remember that his brakes were not what they once were, which meant they should have been applied a few steps earlier. The inside of the door made an effective crash barrier, but fortunately Louis's head didn't seem to be affected too much by the impact. Before he left the house each morning to head to work, PC Snap made sure that he had everything he needed. Truncheon, whistle, handcuffs, notebook, pencil, and of course, Louis. Yes, Louis is a police dog, and a very good one. Ever since PC Snap had rescued him from a burning building, Louis had been his partner. PC Snap used to keep track of how many patrols they'd been on, how many criminals they'd arrested, how many lives they'd saved, but there were now simply too many to count. PC Snap had, however, managed to keep track of the bravery awards Louis had been awarded. 3, more than any other police dog in Devon. They were a very effective team and the best of friends. With all the tools of his trade on hand, PC Snap opened the front door, called over his shoulder a goodbye to his mum and stepped out of the door. At least he tried to, because blocking his way, as they were most days of the school holidays, were Beth and Archie, the 2 kids from next door. The barrage of questions was relentless. Who are you going to arrest today, PC Snap? Who did you arrest yesterday? Who will you arrest tomorrow? Can we stroke Louis? Can we try the handcuffs on? Can we come to work with you? PC Snap did his best to deal with each question in turn, but before he could answer the first one, he was being asked the second and usually the third. As much as they made getting to work harder, PC Snap loved Archie and Beth, and they loved him too, but not as much as they loved Louis, and Louis knew it. The poor animal could barely move under the pats and strokes Beth and Arch lavished him with. He adored every one of them, returning them in kind with licks, woofs, and tail wags. Aside from a 4-inch height gap between them, Beth and Archie could have been twins. Beth was 13 months older than Archie, and, as she loved to say, that meant she was in charge. She advertised herself as a tomboy, which to an extent she was, but she was a beautiful, chubby-cheeked, strong-willed little girl with a smile to die for, beautiful, long, loosely curled, light brown hair with streaks of blonde in it that increased in number, length and thickness as the summer unfolded. Beth rated herself as something of a detective, having read numerous Secret 7, Famous 5, Scooby-Doo and Harry Potter books. She was a bit of a George, Anne, Daphne and Hermione rolled into one. On more than one occasion, she had helped PC Snap unpick a mystery and, although PC Snap never told her, she was a born detective. Her little, although PC Snap never said that to him, brother, Archie, was very different. He was a 6-year-old boy through and through, from the ripped baseball cap on his head all the way down past his snotty face, food-stained T-shirt, dirty socks and well-worn trainers. Everything about Archie screamed urchin, and to an extent he was, but inside was a heart so warm it pulsated affection and love, especially where Louis was concerned. On many a night, Archie had fallen asleep on Louis in front of the log fire and had to be carried home by PC Snap and gently lowered into bed without washing a face that needed a good scrub or brushing hair that would take a rake and a prayer in the morning to get it into good order. PC Snap saw in Archie much of himself when he was younger, and many times Archie had proved himself to be brave and courageous, not a little intelligent. Although clearly not official police officers, PC Snap had long ago given Beth and Archie unofficial police numbers. They had even been given them in an official ceremony at the police station. Beth was PC 029 and Archie was PC 251. Whenever they were assisting PC Snap or just playing cops and robbers in the garden, they would proudly wear the insignia. Every now and then, PC Snap would hold a snap inspection to check that they had polished their badges. They always had, and their mother had told them that without fail they would clean them every night, often sleeping in them, just in case PC Snap should wake them in the middle of the night needing their assistance.
And a reminder that if you do a Google search on PC Snap and the Case of the Escaped Lion by Chris Hall, it will come up with details of where you can purchase the book, or you can spool back through this podcast to hear the information Chris gave you about this earlier. And that's it for another edition. Hope you found it informative. Production music has been provided by audionautics.com. Till the next time, thanks for listening, and bye for now.
In an ancient stunnery town, with programmes just for you. The Plympton Podcast.